Did you know that there's a civil war in the Philippines? Let's talk about that. For the past 53 years, the Philippines has been at war with the Communist Party of the Philippines, Maoist guerrillas that have taken up arms and are waging a people's democratic revolution in the countryside. And by all accounts, this war isn't going to stop anytime soon. The CPP, founded by Jose Maria Sison, leads the New People's Army and traces its traditions all the way back to the Philippine Revolutionary War of 1896, when revolutionaries under the Katipunan fought against Spanish colonialism. But to really understand what's going on and why it's going on, we're going to need some context. The history of the Philippines is the history of colonialism in Asia. In the 16th century, the Spanish Empire came to the Philippines and made it one of her colonies, an arrangement that lasted for 3 centuries. Then the Americans came, then the Second World War happened, and then the Philippines found itself given its independence in 1946. But the country was hardly independent. It relied heavily on the United States just to prop itself up as a country, something America took advantage of by securing control of key industries and making sure American businesses enjoyed preferential treatment. Fast forward to the 1960s. 2 decades of semi-colonial American exploitation resulted in an explosion of nationalist sentiment. Enter Jowa Sison, then a professor in university and the leader of the National Democratic Mass Movement, at the time still in its infancy. At the time, the Communist Party of the Philippines was all but dead, having suffered setback after setback thanks to its old leadership. In 1968, Sison and 12 others managed to re-establish the CPP, this time under the guidance of Mao Zedong. 3 months later, they established the New People's Army and wasted no time in waging war. So, that's how it started. For the communists, armed struggle is the continuation of an uninterrupted revolution that started way back in 1896. This time, however, the enemies weren't the Spanish but global imperialism itself. Because although the Philippines is one of the richest countries in Southeast Asia, it is also one of the most exploited. Today, in 2021, some 2,919 billionaires own 40% of the country's natural resources. For a country the size of Italy but with a population of 110 million, that means each Filipino has an insultingly small slice of the pie. That is, if there is any pie for them to grab in the first place. Most corporations and industries in the Philippines are owned in one way or the other by the comprador class. In the countryside, which remains mostly agrarian, landlords and real estate developers work together to keep farmers landless and to convert farmlands into subdivisions and tourist traps. The average Filipino makes so little compared to the richest. Some 2 million people live on less than $2 a day, while 18% of the population lives below the poverty line. Filipino workers make a minimum wage of $7 to $10 a day, which is far below the $21.34 that they need to make a living wage. Farmers, farm workers, and fisher folk, which comprise roughly 60 to 75% of the population, get shafted with low prices and reap high cost of debt, ensuring that they stay poor. Although the Philippines found itself independent in 1946, it has simply replaced old enemies with new ones. Today, the Philippines is the shining example of neoliberalism at work. Foreign corporations steal natural resources as export, while the country depends on crucial imports to survive. It is the first step and the last stop in the imperialist supply chain, and the only winners are countries like China and the United States. So, no small wonder why the CPP has decided to wage its war. For them, the civil war is not an insurgency, but a war for national liberation against imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucrat capitalism. It is the continuation of a centuries-long struggle to be truly free. Successive governments have tried various tactics to end the communist civil war. Since 1987, peace talks have been on and off between the Philippine government and the communists, with the last round ending abruptly in 2017. But from day one, the Philippine government has tried to end the revolution, the extreme force. Of course, it's that same militaristic approach that all but ensures that the revolution finds its continuance. Under the present government alone, more than 500,000 civilians have been forced to evacuate due to military bombing and strafing. More than 400 activists, meanwhile, have been killed for suspected ties to the communists. Recently, the government announced that it was close to acquiring its first tanks from Israel, while the biggest super typhoon of the year continues to devastate multiple communities in the country's poorest regions. One thing is clear: something is wrong in the state of the Philippines. For 53 years, more and more people participate in the civil war, ultimately to correct these wrongs and in the hope of making things right. Come May 2022, the Philippines will hold its elections. Whoever wins will be faced with the question of how they will end the country's longest war. Will they come to the table and address the root causes, or will they fall back to the old tactics of their predecessors? We'll see.